welcome to A Very English Craft Dream, and another in the scrapbooking series, this time using mixed media, using the packaging technique. So I chose a photograph of my son climbing some rocks in the Peak District, and I wanted to reflect the colours and structure of that photograph. So for the very first time I decided I would try the packaging technique. So I am using some old packaging and putting some inks and some sprays onto the packaging and just mixing it about a little bit, trying to use the colours to reflect the colours that are on the photograph and in the sort of relative positions. So next I'm using just a fine paintbrush there, just to mix some of the colours around a little bit so that they don't come out too blocky. And again, just adding in a few more bits of ink in different colours and repeating some of the ones I'd already used just to give a stronger and more defined effect. So now putting the paper onto it, smudging it round and peeling it off to see what effect I've got, and then just using the remainder that's on there and smudging what's actually on the paper around underneath the plastic packaging there. And again, just using a paintbrush just to blend in some of the more stronger areas that I didn't want to remain as strong. And at the bottom I wanted to have a sort of darker effect for the rocks, so just layering on some more here using the same technique as before. Climbing in the Peak District and bouldering in the Peak District was one of my son's favourite pastimes when he was living at home and when he was at university. He went to university not far from one of his favourite climbing spots, so he continued to do that whilst there. It's also one of our favourite places to go for walks and things, and when we go to the Peak District you just feel a sense of relaxation, like all the stresses and strains of the world are lifted off your shoulders. So just double checking with the photograph to see if I've got the colours as I would like them. I will trim that photograph down so that hasn't got a large white border on it, as you can see there. So you can see that I've actually skipped on quite a bit here. There was a little bit of film that was corrupted, so unfortunately there's a bit you've not seen. So you can see I've backed the photograph in a shade of grey, and I've used the stencil that's up the top there to put some more inks and some watercolours through onto the page towards the bottom to represent the rocks that he was climbing. You can just vaguely make out some clouds that I'm just taking off that were part of an ephemera pack, I think Vicky Bouton ephemera pack, and I'm going to use those on the blue up there. They kind of merge in, but it's kind of the effect I wanted. I was trying to make it kind of tone on tone, this layout. So just using some wet glue just to stick them down there. So the next thing I did was I thought I would draw some plants on using some watercolour pencils, and later on I'd try it with some watercolour pen. However, I'm not really very happy with how they turn out like that, so I used the brush to try and merge them a little bit, added some water which diluted it a bit too much, so I ended up blotting that off with some kitchen roll, but it did leave a little bit of a green tone behind it, which is actually the result that I ended up being happy with in the end anyway. So using a watercolour pen to try it again, but it just seemed a little bit naive, and when I blotted it, it kind of almost looked a little bit too strong there, so just damping it down with the kitchen roll just to knock the colour back a little bit, which in the end gave a much nicer effect. Adding a different green in just to add another tone on top of there. So I think I've gone from wanting plants there to wanting an effect that maybe looked like trees or maybe moss on the rocks. And I think I've decided that I just wanted it fairly loose and fairly abstract in the end. So then I start playing around with these little ephemera, nature, plants and insects and birds and things, and I wanted to use a few of them on here, but it was trying to decide which ones went best where and actually made some sense with the picture. I really like that tall toadstool, but it just didn't seem to go very well. It was too big really for the layout for what I actually wanted this time. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to go for the tone on tone, I'm actually going to colour in parts of these monochrome ephemera. So I'm using the same watercolour pens as I used before, and I'm just going to colour in parts of the leaf, not all of it, so that some of it is green and some of it is grey, so it kind of tones in with the background. And then I'm going to repeat that process with this little bird over the other side, just colouring with the tip of its wing there with a bit of green. And I couldn't decide if I'm going to use this bird or not, or whether I'm going to use a beetle. And in some ways a beetle made more sense. And I find another bird, some more leaves and a butterfly, and again it was just a case of playing around with it until I found something that I actually liked. So one bird, one set of leaves, oh, a second little bird there, and a butterfly, with the leaf and the larger of the birds having been coloured in to be tone on tone. I then looked at the rocks that I'd drawn down below and felt that the stack on its own just looked a little bit odd, so I just wanted to add a few more. So I picked up the stencil again and just went around the edges of the rocks, and then using a brush, because I used a watercolour pen, I can just smudge that line slightly and just give a little bit of definition. Just spraying a little bit of water just to help loosen up a little bit more. So what you didn't see at the very beginning of this is actually the paper had been pre-prepared with some gesso the night before and left to dry, which is why I can go in with the watercolour and smudge it around quite a lot, rather than it being just onto unprepared paper. And you can see down the bottom where I'm sort of doing the rocks down there, that's actually unprepared paper down the bottom, and it gives a slightly different effect. So now that's finished, I'd like to thank you for joining me in a very English craft room, and ask that you will come back and join me again and press the like and subscribe buttons. And please check out some of my other videos. Thank you.